today we're going to talk about specific metrics and some of the challenges associated with developing the appropriate metrics for your organization. And we'll talk about how HR has a seat at the table, but what that really means. So, again, as we mentioned previously, HR's role is becoming more strategic, and HR practitioners are increasingly considered trusted advisors. HR has evolved, and now we have what they refer to as a seat at the table, meaning that HR has a say and a seat at the executive table. But what's really important when we're looking at what the seat at the table means is that's fantastic, we're at the table, but now what? What does that mean? And to continue to have a seat at the table, to continue to have a say, it's really important for HR practitioners to show value, specifically value that drives the business. So now what? What do we need to do? We need to be able to inform organizational strategy from an HR perspective. We need to add value to the organization. We need to align with business strategy and help drive the business. And really importantly, we need to show a return on the investment. As we mentioned previously, HR used to be considered a significant cost center, and so to show value that the HR role really has value, especially from an executive sense, it's really important to involve specific HR metrics to show aligning with organizational strategy, helping inform decisions, and driving the business. So keeping this in mind, we'll talk about what HR metrics programs actually provide. So developing an appropriate HR metrics program for your organization provides the ability to quantify, to measure, to benchmark, and to track key indicators, key performance indicators, key financial indicators, etc. over time. The important part about this is that you're tracking it over time. You can see the overall organizational health based on these specific metrics. So you can see if you're getting better or worse in particular areas and adjust organizational strategy appropriately. So in discussing some of the challenges and considerations for developing out a specific program of metrics, it's important to understand why it is that you're measuring certain items. The idea behind this is don't just measure to measure. You can have reporting, predictive analytics, etc., but if you're not measuring the appropriate things, then it's not really going to be all that beneficial and not going to add value. So really understanding why it is that you're measuring certain things. So in doing so, consider the following. Does a specific measurement or metric bring value to the organization? What do you hope to show or learn with this metric? What do you hope to increase or decrease and understand? Is it important to have this metric tracked over time? As we mentioned before, being able to see the sort of time lapse of a metric will help show whether you're getting better, staying the same, or getting worse in a certain area. And then how will this metric reporting inform actual decision making? Again, how does this align with the overall organizational strategy, and how does it inform decision making? So the idea behind the why is it that you're measuring specific things, and what do you hope that these measurements will help inform going forward? Now that we've discussed the why, we'll move on to the what, and some important things to understand and consider when you determine what it is that you're measuring. And again, it's important to make sure that your measurements really add value or inform decision making. So consider the following when you're determining what it is to measure. How does a specific metric align with the organizational strategy? What will these metrics actually inform, and how will they help inform decision making or adjusting strategy? Another key consideration here is to really determine what it is that you're measuring and if that measurement is really important. Again, going back to the why, we don't want to just measure certain things just to say that we're measuring them, but make sure what it is that you're measuring actually adds value to the organization. Are these measures and metrics easy to capture and report on? Oftentimes organizations will go into deep detail on a number of metrics, but they're not necessarily that important, and a lot of times they're difficult to capture. So not saying that some of the metrics that are more difficult to capture aren't relevant, but just make sure that in developing out the appropriate metrics, that ones that are harder to capture and report on are certainly relevant and adding value to the organization. So finally, I want to discuss return on investment, or ROI. for an organization. So return on investment is typically a ratio or percentage, and it focuses on either the cost savings or profits realized from a certain investment. In other words, it deals with the returns realized from investing in certain initiatives or systems, things of that nature. So the formula for ROI is pretty simple. It's just the gain from a specific investment, subtract the initial cost of the investment, divided over the cost of the investment. So let's look at a real example. So, for example, your organization purchases a new HRIS system for $200,000 in order to help with the recruiting process, and they realize a $300,000 cost savings up to this point. So the ROI, you can see the formula here, is $200,000 minus $300,000 divided by $200,000. So the ROI comes out at 0.5. To turn it into a percentage, you just multiply by 100, and so the to-date ROI is 50%. So that's the pretty basic formula for ROI. It's certainly simple to do with just quantitative metrics, but one thing I want to point out too, and what makes ROI a little bit more nebulous and intangible, is that it doesn't necessarily take into account some of the more qualitative aspects. But what I mean by this is, there are certain things, for example, employee engagement, that are more difficult to measure from just a quantitative standpoint. And so just keep this in mind when you're determining what to plug into ROI investment. It's a great measurement to be able to quickly show results, but it does get somewhat complex when there are a lot of intangible results that you're trying to show returns on that aren't easily quantifiable. So just something to quickly point out about some of the issues with just the ROI and what you're plugging into that, but it certainly is a useful metric. So just to recap here, HR now has a seat at the table, but we need to continually show value through helping executives make these informed decisions based off of HR metrics. As we mentioned before, in organizations, people account for a significant amount of their costs. So it's really important for HR to be in tune to this, as well as the organizational strategy, so that they can best offer advice to help modify and adjust the organizational strategy in a way that gives the organization a competitive advantage. Again, HR metrics and measurements help quantify, measure, benchmark, and track the people side of business. And so that's really intended to show specific challenges that an organization may be having, raise red flags about the organizational health, illustrate some of the improvements that the organization has made, and show either improvements, consistency, or challenges over a period of time to see, basically compare them against themselves over amount of time to see, is the health improving or getting worse for an organization. And, also there are a number of challenges associated with determining which appropriate metrics to use. Again, not all metrics are relevant for all organizations, so it's important to keep that in mind when you're looking at how does this align with the organizational strategy? Which metrics should I use? Does this really make sense? Do we need to have this particular metric or not? And how can the metric potentially be adjusted in order to show exactly what it is that you're trying to show? So remember the why and what behind what it is that you're measuring. Why are you doing it? And again, it's not just to measure. What are you trying to get out of a particular measurement? Is it really telling you what it is that you want to know? And then finally, ROI. It's a relatively simple formula. It can show sort of immediate results. So it's a great measurement to use, specifically if it's a easily quantifiable situation where you can show, here's the immediate rate of return to date over, for the example that we gave, a particular system that was invested in. ROI does get a little bit more complex when you're dealing with things that are not as easily quantifiable. So just let's keep that in mind as you use that measurement.